Fun.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophia,
I'm Bronwyn.
I'm Itty.
and this is our presentation on emotional expression. All right, so to start off, what is emotional expression? So it is the portrayal of emotions, whether it be verbal or nonverbal or conscious expression, or without self-awareness of expressing them. So our bodies are basically hardwired to feel these emotions, whether we express them or not, and they play a vital role in human evolution. So dating all the way back to 1872, Darwin, he wrote first about emotional expression in his book, The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals. So Sharif and Tracy in 2011 expanded on Darwin's findings, and they found that the reasons emotional expression is evolutionary beneficial is to prepare the organism for a potential response to a recurrent stimulus and to communicate critical social information. So, for example, expressing the emotion of fear you feel when you like see a predator, say like a lion or something like that, it comes in the form of like running away. So this emotional response is put into play to preserve our species and to for survival. So in reference to emotional expression and social interactions, it's fundamental using the used to communicate, whether it be by verbal expression or facial expression or bodily expression.
There we go. All right, so to start off with more of the research side of it, we're going to talk about the problem that emotional expression solves and the research behind the fact that emotional expressions were an evolutionary advantageous adaptation that evolved with all of us. So the problem is the need for communication within and between groups of differing species and communities, and the ability to quickly convey your needs and wants for survival with those other members. And so the solution is that facial expressions, physical gestures, and tone of voice, which are all things that make up emotional expression, they can convey universal emotions to different groups and other members, both verbally and non-verbally. And so the evolutionary evidence that we have, the research is by Matsumoto and Willingham in 2008, and this is the article that we gave you guys to read. And they studied the facial emotions in sighted, congenitally, and non-congenitally blind Olympic athletes. And they looked at their facial expressions in relationship to how they placed in their events. So basically, they hypothesized that if facial expressions are learned, so learned mechanism, we would see that the congenitally blind athletes would not have the universal facial expressions that we know. And if it is an evolved adaptation, then we would see that there's no difference in the facial expressions between all three groups. And the results showed just that the spontaneous facial expressions did not differ between the three groups. And the researchers were able to differentiate the winners from non-winners in all three categories solely from the facial expressions, meaning all of them were able to convey what they were feeling just through their facial expressions. And so this is evidence for an evolutionary adaptation. So from my research, there were two main theories of emotional expression that were talked about in the book titled Emotions, Current Issues, and Future Directions, with research by Oren and Bakarowski in 2001. So the first, theory of emotional expression could be that it is a selfish gene or competitive mechanism that we've adapted it for. So this would be using emotional expression to simply inform and gain a benefit from the interaction with someone else, and with no positive outcome for the receiver. So an example of this would be smiling to receive positive responses or crying or sadness to receive attention. And then the other theory, which was supported by the researchers in this book, is the cooperative mechanism. And this is the idea that we use emotional expression to create relationship with others. An example of this would be smiling and laughing to create positive relationships and to increase enjoyment with others. And this is crucial in forming bonds with other members And in the end, the idea kind of goes back to the idea like laughter is contagious. We're able to spread positivity through a group, which helps us create those bonds, and then that can help us with survival in the end, and then help the other ones with survival as well. So next I'm going to review the research done by Ekman and Friesen in 1971 on the 6 universal emotions, and if they really are universally understood. So for this study, they looked at 2 groups, westernized and non-westernized populations. The non-westernized populations were isolated and they had no prior exposure to Western societies before the experiment. So each group was shown 3 pictures and told a story that related to an emotion. So for an example, a guy that had just lost his job and has been moping around lately. Their task was to pick which facial expression matched the story. So for this example, it would probably be sadness if a guy lost his job. So the results showed that there were no significant differences between the results of the most and least westernized participants. And so this basically said that, or supported the idea that facial expressions are not culture specific, but instead are universally understood. Like we talked about earlier in the semester, this is one of the cross-cultural evidence, something that you can fit in the cross-cultural box, I guess, that for evolutionary adaptation. However, in a few slides, we're going to discuss how these cultures may interpret facial expressions differently, even though we all understand what they actually mean.
So going on to some gender differences, when it comes to gender and emotional expression, contrasting female and male, there were 2 theories as to why females could be better at the discrimination of emotions and mostly negative emotions. So first we have the attachment promotion hypothesis, which states that females have a superiority in the discrimination of all emotional expression due to kind of the evolutionary fact that mothers who are highly responsive to, like, say, an infant's cry or their smile or any nonverbal signals are likely to produce securely attached infants. So this means that the better a mother is at responding to an infant, the greater the long-term like parental bond will be, and that the evolutionary job of a mother um, is just that, as a primary caregiver. The second hypothesis we have is the fitness threat hypothesis that states female superiority may be restricted to expressions of negative emotion. This is because in human evolution, negative emotions signal a potential threat to the infant's survival and calls for attention from the caregiver. So this is due to the mother's protection for the survival of their offspring, hence the mama bear picture and the cub on your left. So this is the study that Hampson did in 2006. He tested these 2 theories using facial matching cards and found that women were indeed faster than men at responding to both positive and negative emotions from the facial cues on the cards. This finding did support the attachment promotion hypothesis. However, as you can see from the graph on your left, they also found support for the fitness threat hypothesis because there was a greater sex difference for negative emotions with no evidence that female superiority was learned from previous childcare experience. So therefore, the discrimination was not learned and supported the evolutionary hypothesis. These results supported the sex differences in emotional expression hypothesis and that they were evolved mechanisms and not domain general learning.
In regards to the cross-cultural differences, there's a study that consisted of 128 Americans from San Francisco State University, consisting of like several different ethnicities. And then they also tested 80 Japanese from Osaka University of Education. And each observer was required to basically see 56 slides of different facial expressions and were asked to determine what emotion was displayed, as well as indicate the intensity of the facial expression, and then indicate the intensity of a level of what they thought the poser was feeling. Next slide. Yeah. So researchers had two main hypotheses, which were one, that Americans will give significantly higher ratings than the Japanese on external expression, and that two, the Japanese will give significantly higher ratings on subjective experiences. So in regards to these results, they averaged two ratings for each of the four poser types, being a man and a woman from America and a man and a woman from Japan. And within these posing types for each emotion, they computed a 5-way ANOVA test on the ratings. And based on the ratings, for the expression ratings, Americans did have a higher mean than the Japanese. And for the subjective experience ratings, Japanese had a higher mean than the Americans. Therefore, these results provided a strong support for both hypothesis 1 and 2. And these results could stem from the studies that show when judging strong expressions, the Japanese interpret the strength of the expression by suggesting that it may be appropriate context to display emotions, as they interpret the imposers or the poser's feelings as equivalent to the strength of the external display. Whereas Americans operate on different presumptions, knowing that they have a display rule to express emotions in a suggestive and even exaggerated manner, as they presume that the poser probably does not feel the emotions as they strongly has presented.
So there is some controversy in the emotional expression topics that psychologists today are pushing back on, and it's part of Ekman's universal emotional expression theory. So psychologist Carlos Crivelli in 2011 challenged his fear recognition as not being culturally universal. So Ekman did do universal findings from isolated populations, but Crivelli decided to travel to the Trobriand Islands off the mainland of New Guinea and study a tribe that was in complete isolation from all society outside of the island. So his research study was conducted the same way, but found different results among the Trobriand Islanders. So he found they associated happiness the same, but the fear depiction, like the one on the left, that face, he said that most of the men on the Trobriand Islands looked at as angry and not fearful. So they associated the gasping face as more threatening and most likely to start a fight rather than have that fearful look. So with that evidence, he saw that the universal emotions only had minimal universality and are not completely universal. So this is because the evidence here suggests that the reaction and interpretation can vary from culture to culture, as it does in the islander culture. In the Western culture, it is seen as feeling fear, but the Trobrians see it as instilling fear instead. So aside from that research, though, the universal emotion expression and understanding is still the most widely accepted theory today.
In regards to emotional expression in other species, we found that in regards to elephants, which is actually my favorite animal, there's a series of studies that have related to the acoustic structure of elephant vocalizations to the social context that may reflect the emotional state of callers. So these studies show that there are periods of high social excitement as elephants produce a more high frequency calls such as trumpet noise, and during low periods of low excitement, they produce more low frequency calls such as rumbles. So these rumbles are produced by subordinates during dominance interactions with social superiors that increase in frequency and as well as amplitude when comparing with rumbles produced in periods of like social calmness. And in regards to emotion and action, emotions can influence the generation of action in two ways. There's the tendency and readiness to act, as well as the decision to act, as different emotions correspond to different patterns of actions. For example, anger can usually lead to like aggression and retaliation, whereas fear can lead to preparation for a rapid escape from a dangerous situation. And for decision making, it's also viewed as essential element in human action, as when people are in an emotional state of like anger or joy, fear, jealousy, embarrassment, or even like depression, their decision making may be quite different depending on that social situation that they're in. as well as emotions, can also help frame our options of actions to be evaluated and allow us to choose from fewer alternatives if we are in a situation where we have a lot to choose from. And then last but not least, when basing our decisions on emotions, they can actually help us accomplish our goals that are important to us if they're deemed as inherently significant to our moral values.
So some unanswered questions that could be used for future research are adding more positive emotional expression to Ekman's research. There was a little bit of pushback that he only had happy as his positive emotion. So using content, etc., could show some of those findings that were found in the Trobriand Island research. And that's it.
These are references. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.